How did that one kid at your school die? What happened to Aaron? Aaron and I had both been at the same house party one night. Nothing seemed unusual then. But later, while he was walking home alone, for people, 3 guys and a woman, jumped him. They beat him until he was out cold, then left him lying across a set of train tracks. Everyone in town seemed to know what had happened, but the police never acted on it. It took them a full decade before they decided to investigate, and only then did charges get filed against the people involved. When the trial finally happened, it was a mess from start to finish. The courtroom was full of shady locals tossing out half-truths and flat-out lies. I used to be good friends with one of the witnesses for the defense, until the day he broke into my apartment while I was at work. My pregnant girlfriend was with me at the time, thank God. He cleaned us out. In the end, just one person was convicted, and even then, it wasn't for murder. It was a disaster all the way through. Aaron's mom fought for justice for her son for more than 10 years. I only knew him casually, but he was one of those genuinely good people you can't help but like. What happened to him was brutal, and it never should have gone the way it did. I hope you're at peace now, Aaron. The boy who wouldn't stay down. There's a bit of a twist to this story. The kid I'm talking about is my brother. When he was just a little guy, he tripped and landed face first onto about 6 inches of rebar. It slid past his left eye, went into his brain, and stopped against the back of his skull on the right side. By the time our mom found him, his heart had stopped. She yanked him off the bar, called for an ambulance, and started doing what she could. This was in 1990, and the paramedics didn't even believe what had happened. The eye had gone back into place, and there wasn't much to see from the outside. Still, they managed to bring him back. His heart quit 3 more times at the hospital. They ended up flying in an army surgeon from Northern Ireland who specialized in gunshot wounds to the head. That man did the brain surgery that saved my brother's life. Now, somehow, he's about to turn 40. Not bad for someone who technically died 4 times. And if that wasn't enough, for years later, he was 8 then, he got hold of Mom's lighter early one morning. He tried to pull off some trick he'd seen someone do and got it horribly wrong. He ended up with 3rd-degree burns over 52% of his body. Then, when he was 12, a seatbelt failed during a car crash, and he went right through the windshield and walked away without a scratch. Seems like he was cursed with an accident every 4 years. At least his 16th year came and went without another disaster. The boy we tried to help. I went to school with a boy who was born HIV positive and had developed AIDS because his parents were drug users. By the last 3 years of high school, he'd already gone through 3 surgeries and lost nearly 40% of his lungs. He didn't have it easy socially. A lot of kids bullied him, and truth be told, he could be difficult to be around. Growing up in foster care had left him awkward and unsure of how to connect with people. But my friends and I always tried to include him when we could. After we graduated in 2009, he just sort of disappeared from our lives. We'd occasionally hear gossip or spot him on the street, but nothing more. Then in 2017, a friend of mine was volunteering at an organization that helped homeless people and saw him standing in line for food. By then, he'd been living on the streets for a long time. A bunch of us who still kept in touch got together, collected supplies, and gave him everything we thought could help him get by for a while. He was grateful and told us about his life, how foster care let him go as soon as he turned 18, and how he'd been struggling since. Less than 2 days later, another volunteer called my friend with terrible news. He had gotten into a fight at the shelter and been kicked out. As he was leaving, he fell, hit his head on the curb, and died instantly. The fight that didn't matter. Back in high school, our guidance counselor was married to a man with serious money. They had a son named Brett, the kind of guy who was good-looking, well-liked, and carried himself with confidence. He could be a little entitled at times, but honestly, not nearly as bad as you'd expect from someone in his position. Most people thought he was a pretty decent guy. Brett started dating a girl whose family didn't have much. They lived in a house shared with 3 other families just so the kids could attend our school. Brett's mom hated it. She made her feelings very clear and didn't try to hide her disapproval from anyone. The longer Brett stayed with this girl, the more her anger grew. When Brett and the girl decided to go to the same college, his mom completely lost it. But before the tension could really explode, Halfway through senior year, Brett died in a car accident. After that, we never saw his mom again. The girl transferred to another school. Just like that, this little drama we'd all been watching was over, replaced by something unbearably tragic. I still think about Brett sometimes, and I wonder if his mom ever lies awake wishing she hadn't spent the last months of his life angry about something as meaningless as money. The boy who never got to grow up. He was 13 when he ended his life. The reason? A 2-day suspension from school. He'd always been a rough kid, quick to cause trouble, always stirring things up. But my mom once told me he came from a home where nothing was ever safe or steady. His dad was often drunk, and there were times he'd forget to pick his son up after school. Sometimes he'd drop him off at 5 in the morning, in the dead of winter, when school didn't even start until 8. Mom would spot him shivering outside and bring him into our car so he could warm up. Because of that, he treated me differently. He never went out of his way to pick on me. When he got suspended, he panicked. He must have been terrified of what his father would do to him. So, instead of facing the beating he thought was coming, he hanged himself. I wasn't even home when it happened. I was up in the mountains skiing with relatives. First day of winter break. While I was carving down snowy slopes, he was gone. I still think about him from time to time, even though we weren't close. I imagine how things could have been if his life had been different. He'd be 30 now, maybe married, maybe a dad himself. But in my mind, he'll always be that neglected 13-year-old kid who never got the chance to grow up. The girl from the bus. When I was a kid, there was this girl who lived close by and rode the same bus as me for years. She was 1 grade ahead, so sometimes we didn't cross paths much, but we stayed on friendly terms. Over time, we hung out here and there in group settings during middle school and high school. We weren't close, but I liked her. She was one of those people who stood out without even trying. She had that almost movie-like presence. Pretty, funny, naturally talented. She had a great voice, often singing solos at school concerts, and she could play instruments too. Smart, hardworking, and by all appearances, she had everything going for her. Then came the fall of her junior year. Her sister found her in the woods near their home. She had hung herself. Everything pointed to suicide. I can't speak for what she was going through privately, but her sister later shared that she had battled severe depression. I hate thinking about how much pain she must have been hiding under the perfect image everyone saw. I was a sophomore then. The last time I ever saw her was on the bus ride home. That night, word spread like wildfire over social media. Back then, Skype was where everyone talked. The next day, the entire junior class walked out together and held a ceremony in the school parking lot. From my classroom window, I could see them standing in the cold, some crying, some just staring at the ground. The grief was visible even from far away. At her wake, her parents played a tribute video. It started with baby pictures, then clips of her growing up, and ended with a recording of her singing a solo from a school concert the year before. It was hauntingly beautiful, and there wasn't a dry eye in the place. Her death changed the way I thought about suicide forever. I'll always remember her. Rest easy, my friend. The funeral faker parade. Yeah, it happened. And it was as bizarre as it sounds. There was this kid at school, kind of a misfit. His home life was rough, and you could tell. He craved attention, but not in a sad, quiet way. More like pulling stunts so people would laugh. Most students ignored him unless he was being ridiculous, but there were maybe 8 or 9 of us who actually hung out with him as friends. When he passed, the reason was something no one expected: autoerotic asphyxiation. We all found out in shock. The school told us we couldn't skip classes to attend the funeral, so the entire student body staged a walkout. Suddenly, that same 99% of kids who barely knew him were swarming the funeral home. It was so packed I had to stand there watching people who never gave him the time of day, act like they'd been his best friends. One girl he dated, for all of 5 days, shoved his grieving grandmother aside so she could give this dramatic speech about how much she loved him. Others were painting him as this sweet, brilliant, once-in-a-lifetime kind of person. But here's the truth. He hated school, hated most of those people, and was just biding his time until he could drop out. The week before he died, my memories of him aren't poetic. He tricked some kid into eating a scab by saying it was beef jerky, and he tapped me on the shoulder so I'd turn around to see his nutsack pulled through his shorts with a smiley face drawn on it. That was him. Messed up, wild, but 100% real. Honestly, his future probably wasn't going to be glamorous. Likely a lifetime of scraping by and maybe falling into drugs. But despite all the chaos, he was a good soul trying to deal with a terrible set of circumstances. Years later, I watched Robin Williams in Man of the Year and felt a punch in the gut. It was almost the exact same scene I'd lived through. Rest easy, Moses. You were one crazy bastard, but you were one of the genuine ones. The bush that wasn't a turkey. I remember the day we lost him like it happened yesterday. He had been suspended from school the day before, and the next morning he went turkey hunting. The official story was that he was hiding in a bush, making turkey calls, when another hunter fired straight into it, thinking he was aiming at a bird. My friend was still alive after the shot, but instead of helping, the man left him there. He lay bleeding for hours until he finally passed away. His father and brother found him about an hour too late. Later, people who knew the shooter told a different version. They said my classmate had stumbled onto something he was never meant to see, and there had been another person who witnessed it. But the man who pulled the trigger only faced a misdemeanor, because that was all they could legally charge him with at the time. That changed later. The governor signed a law making it a felony not to render aid in a hunting accident. He came to our high school to sign it right in front of us. It was a terrible loss. The last time I saw his parents' business, they had a huge portrait of him painted on the side of their trailer. Every time I drive past it, I still feel that heavy ache in my chest. The last song he ever played. We worked together as lifeguards at the local pool, so I knew him pretty well. He was one of the most popular guys in school, confident to the point of arrogance. He was always showing off the stereo his dad bought for his truck, cranking it up so loud you could hear him blocks away as he drove off. One night, after leaving a friend's party around 1 a.m., he was speeding down one of the winding roads in our county, going about 20 over the limit. They said he was fiddling with his radio when he lost control and slammed into a tree. The coroner said he died instantly. By the time the police and paramedics arrived, the music was still blasting. A buddy of the cop on the scene told me they had to pull the battery just to silence it. We weren't especially close, and to be honest, I can barely picture his face anymore. But every time a car passes with the music turned up, my stomach twists. All that life gone over something so small. I guess in a strange way he went out doing something he loved. If there's any comfort in that, it's a thin one. When fiction hits too close. Back in high school, we had this program called Every 15 Minutes. The point was to show how someone dies every 15 minutes because of drunk driving. During the day, a handful of students were killed as part of the program, and announcements were made over the PA system to mark it. One year, things got really intense. A student had actually died from a drunk driving crash a few days before the program. So when the announcement went out, most of us thought it was just part of the simulation. The program itself was intense. A teacher or admin would dress up as the Grim Reaper and choose students around campus to be their victims for the day. Those students would wear tattered clothes, have makeup to make it look like they were dead, and move silently through school. Outside, there would be a staged wrecked car with other students inside acting like they had died, while police and ambulances pretended to respond. At the end of the day, the students who were killed were taken to a mock courtroom. Another student was put on trial for drunk driving and killing them. Part of the exercise included writing a letter to their parents as if they had died, saying whatever they had always wanted to say. It was a heavy, emotional program that really made you think about how real drunk driving tragedies are. Lefty and the Train. Back when I was in Navy A school, this was during the time Zero Corpsman training was still at Great Lakes near Chicago, we had a little weekend routine. There was this bar a couple of train stops from base called the Lantern that me and a few classmates liked to hit. One night, another guy and I bonded over having done some brutal watches over Christmas in the freezing snow. Met an older woman at the bar. She claimed she had been a Playboy model back in the 70s. She was flirty, but neither of us was interested. Maybe we hadn't had enough to drink yet. A few weeks later, our duo became a quartet. One night, We were at our usual table when my buddy spotted the woman leaving. The guys egged me on, telling me to go after her. I gave in. She was already across the street, across the train tracks. As I crossed, I heard a train horn and saw the safety arms down. I looked right, thinking, wow, that train is loud and fast, but I'll make it. And I did barely. Just as I got across, a train came zooming from the other direction. Crazy close, but I survived. The ticket guy refused to let me on the train, so my chase ended. Drunk and wandering a bit, I bought a pack of cigarettes from a small shop. It was a beautiful spring evening. Walking back, I saw the lantern again and went in, thinking my friends might still be there. They were pale and shaking. I told them what happened about looking down the track to the right. They all yelled, in unison, "Did you even look left?" I hadn't. From that day on, they called me Lefty for the rest of school. It stuck with me, especially because just a week before, another drunken sailor had been killed by a train in the same area. The party gone horribly wrong. I remember hearing about this one back in 2007. Two guys, let's call them A and B, were at a party at A's house while his parents were away for the weekend. A fight broke out at the end of the night over a girl. By the time things calmed down, only B was left in the house. Drunk and out of control, B strangled A to death in the living room. Panicking, he dragged A into the bathtub and got a knife from the kitchen. He ended up beheading him and cutting off his hands and feet. The next day, B decided he had to dispose of the body. Being in the school chemistry club, he took some kind of acid from there and spent hours trying to dissolve A's body. Turns out the acid was weak, useless for what he had in mind. He just ended up sitting there by the remains until Sunday, when A's parents and sister returned from their weekend trip. They found B in the bathroom, with their son's body in the bathtub, partially dissolved and mutilated. The craziest part? A and B had been best friends. B got about 15 years in prison and, if I heard correctly, was released a few years ago. A friend's mistake. Back in 1990, there was this terrible accident at my school. A classmate of mine was staying at a family's house. They'd taken in an older teen whose parents had kicked him out. What nobody knew was that the teen had brought his dad's gun with him. One night, while my classmate and his brother were sleeping in the same room, the older teen was fooling around with the gun. He pointed it at my classmate, who was just lying there asleep. On a reckless impulse, the teen pulled the trigger at point-blank range. My classmate died instantly. At first, the teen tried to claim they were all playing Russian roulette, basically trying to shift the blame. But the truth came out quickly. People learned he had brought the gun to school before, shown it around, and stashed it in his locker. If anyone had reported it, my classmate might have still been alive. It hit the school hard. That year, 3 students were expelled for bringing guns. My classmate had been in JROTC and was excited to wear his uniform for the first time that Friday. Instead, he was buried in it the next day.